psychology department and the director of the Center for Memory and Brain, was lucky enough to work with Paul to establish this enterprise of the neuroscience major at Boston University. And even though you've heard many words of wisdom already, including, or in addition, I should say, what Steve told us today, I thought I'd add a few more. You get off of just the things you heard this morning, but I'll exhort you just one more time on my end of things as we head out into the world as the first BU neuroscientist. And I thought I would do at this moment, it's the kind of time where you want to reflect on your degree, and it pays, I think, to reflect both backward and forward in time. So thinking back to the beginning, that crazy day when you decided to become neuroscience major, you might have asked yourself, why neuroscience? Probably your parents asked you when you said you wanted to major in neuroscience. They said, major in what? And you had to explain. And then you went through all the difficult things, all the courses, all the lab work, all that stuff to do that. And you might be asking yourself still today, why am I a neuroscientist? So just to remind, or maybe add to what you told your parents to remind you, it's worth thinking back, reflecting back, what does it mean to be a neuroscientist today? And I think it's safe to say that neuroscience is really the coolest major there is here. The reason why is rational here. So what neuroscience is in our modern technological culture in this era is the great adventure of our technology, of our science. In previous eras, the great technology, the great adventure was to sail the oceans, discover new lands, describe the cultures there. That grew and expanded widely in the 1960s when that became the exploration of outer space and the exploration of the deep seas, both having to do with our universes and our closer universes of our bodies, really around the same time that the modern field of molecular genetics got going. And with these modern discoveries, such as Eric Lander and others, we now kind of have the human genome, and they've made it most of the way. So it's a wonderful science. There's still much to learn within it, but much of the basics are already there. And it's really turning over almost to the technology now, how to utilize all that information they have. Neuroscience started a bit later, and it's really the current adventure. It really started, I don't know if you guys know this, in its current form in 1990, when the then first President Bush signed into law a proclamation declaring the 1990s to be the decade of the brain. And what that meant, more fundamentally, of course, everything, as the parents can quickly tell you down here, comes down to money. So what it meant in terms of money was that they tripled the NIH budget, the budget that is of the National Institutes of Health that funds neuroscience research. They tripled that budget in order to produce an acceleration of research above the rather slow rate that it had before that. And it worked. I think it's probably safe to say, albeit hard to measure, that over the last 20 years since that began, we're now just a month up to 20 years of when that proclamation was made, we know probably twice as much or perhaps 10 times as much about how the brain and mind worked than we did at that time. And I think with that acceleration, which is spurred further, by the way, by the ERA funds that came through with Barack Obama, it'll double again, or triple or tenfold again in the next 20 years. And you are the guys who are going to do it in the next 20 years. So I think it's safe to say that, at least among others, if not at the top of all those others, neuroscience is the great adventure, the great challenge of our science culture of these days. And you have the chance to participate in it. You're the neuroscientists who are off to do that. So let me take just one more minute or two to reflect then into the future. So what's next? And I'm going to just add on to some of the things that Steve said and give you a particular twist since we're here at a neuroscience graduation, a sort of neuroscience perspective of how to think as we go forward. So I noticed that most people know what their immediate plans are, at least, although I'm not sure. I'm going to raise their hands and say, you're sure that's what you're going to do for the rest of your lives? See, nobody raises their hands for that. So there's still the searches going on. It's great to know you know what you're doing tomorrow. But what are you going to be doing in 10 years from now? And how do you find out? And of course, I'm going to say what almost all graduation speakers say. The deep thing they say, the word is, Steve didn't use the word, but he made it clear. The word is to find your passion. Right? Find what it is you love and go for it. And really delve into that. When you found your passion, you'll be there. Paul told his story to some extent. He started out in economics, and only when he sort of landed indirectly to some extent in a sort of philosophical domain in the neuroscience department, where I first met him, did he really discover neuroscience, and he found his passion. I should tell my story. So my story was really back when it starts at crazy era earlier. I knew I wanted to know about the mind and brain back even in junior high school. I think it was at the time when we had to do a project in the first biology class that I had. And so what I did is went out and collected brains. This was the only thing pretty much in the textbook in biology. It was to show the different sizes of brains from little critters like mice and fish and whatnot, all the way up to human big brains. And that was it. The brains get bigger as you go up the phylogenetic scale. There was more known, but not much more in the introductory biology text than that. So I went out and collected these brains, and it turned me on to see real brains. And I think I became somewhat of a neuroscientist then, but there weren't neuroscience degrees at that point. That didn't exist back when I was in school. So at first I thought I'd go to medical school, and that'd be the way to learn about the brain and be a neuroscientist. But I discovered later I don't want to be I don't want to be a doctor. I wanted to know how the brain works, not how it malfunctions. I thought I'd be a biochemist. That was kind of the hot area of the genetics of the brain at that time, but I found out the information in genetics in terms of the structure of the brain, while it's there, that's not where the thinking and memory goes. So that isn't what I really wanted to be. I tried being an engineer. I figured I'd build technical hardware brains, but it turned out that I had to figure out how to mix concrete. My first year of chemistry, and I had a chemistry engineering course, engineering class, and dumped out of that. So what was I going to do? Well, I ended up somehow through a friend's linking me up in a neuroscience laboratory at the end of my senior year. And I said, this is it. This is where I want to be. So let me now put that into neuroscience terms and figure out how we're going to do it. So as you try to find that passion, as you try to find out what it is you're going to do, usually the approach is to say, well, think about it. Think about it. What am I good at, right? Where do I want to live? How much money do I want to make? You know, how much security or responsibility? How hard do I want to work? There's ways of sort of thinking your way through what to do, what it is you want to do. Okay. But the trouble is, finding your passion isn't really about thinking your way through all of those kinds of facts. Not that they're unimportant, certainly, yes, and your parents will tell you those are very important things in your life, and eventually you'll confront all those issues. But those aren't about passion, and indeed what you've learned in your neuroscience degree is there's a system of the brain for thinking where to do things, and that's not the passion system. The emotion, the passion system, is a different system of the brain. So there's actually an explanation for that. And in fact, there is a whole different system of the brain that governs emotion. You've lived through it, your parents would tell you live through it all the time. And many times your thinking system, your passion system are actually at odds with one another. They fight with one another. Sometimes the passion one wins over thinking. That's when you get in trouble sometimes. It's an easy way to describe it. Now we know the brain basis of that. And when it succeeds, these two eventually meet and synthesize and work together. So how can you make that happen? And I think the only way you can do it, and you can take the examples of myself, and Paul for that matter, and Steve, and say the only way to do it really is to go out there and put yourself into a new life. Plant yourself into a different life for a while. Right? Try out something. Experiment with yourself. You're the subject of the experiment. Put yourself in new places. Work on something for a while, volunteer for a laboratory, get a job in a laboratory, is even better, of course, when it's always good. And then at the end of the day, walk out and say, how do I feel about this? You know, am I having fun now? Right? And one day, there will be that day when maybe even it was the most frustrating day, the day the experiment failed, or the day you couldn't get something built in the laboratory, the day all the animals escaped, or something or other, right? That didn't work out very well, or that was most challenging. You walk out that day and you say, well, all these things happen and I'm very stressed, but I'm really having fun now. I really enjoy this. This is really what I do. And when that feeling is as strong as the feeling you get when everything does succeed on a different day, when those really match, that they're almost the same thing, really the outcome is just a part of the overall struggle, you will have found your passion. So plant yourself in different lives, try out those lives, and ask yourself at the end of the day, how do I feel now? When you get there, you're there, you have your passion. And whether it's neuroscience or any other field, that I think is the road to finding success. So let me charge you with that. Go out there and find your passion, put together your thinking brain with your feeling brain, make them match, and then you'll be there. Okay, so good luck with that adventure. Congratulations to you. Congratulations to all the support you've had from your parents all along the way. And get out there and do it, guys.